Welcome to the Office of Learning Services workshop on Succeeding with ADHD. Much of the information you will see has been taken from Dr. Russell Barkley, a clinical psychologist and expert in ADHD, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM-5, and other psychologists and researchers. By the end of this presentation, you will understand how ADHD manifests itself, its major characteristics, how it affects educational and work settings as well as social settings, and what treatment options are available for the disorder. What do you think you know about ADHD? Before going any further, ask yourself what you know about ADHD. Is it a behavioral disorder, a childhood disorder, or something just made up? Is it because of too much sugar given to children? Is it too much caffeine, poor parenting, or something else? Think about these things before moving to the next slide. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is the current term for a specific developmental disorder seen in both children and adults that is comprised of deficits in behavioral inhibition, sustained attention, and resistance to distraction, as well as the regulation of one's activity level to the demands of a situation, such as hyperactivity or restlessness. Here are some statistical facts about ADHD. There are about 44 to 48 million children in the United States between the ages of 5 and 18. About 3 million of them have ADHD. Out of approximately 240 million adults in the United States, there are about 7.2 million of them who also suffer from ADHD. ADHD can be seen worldwide in 3 to 7% of children and 2 to 5% of adults. The prevalence varies by age, social class, and population areas. It's more common in children than adults, more common in middle and lower middle classes, more common in population-dense areas. 3 to 1 male to female ratio in children, and 2 to 1 male to female ratio in adults. Females are just as prone to have ADHD and various life course impairments as males, including antisocial disorders, mood and anxiety disorders, addictive disorders, and other developmental disorders. Females with ADHD are more likely to have eating disorders than males. Girls are more adversely affected by ADHD than boys in academics, peer relationships, and being bullied, especially the inattentive type that we'll talk about later. Here is an example of an ADHD versus non-ADHD brain at the age of 6. You'll see the ADHD brain on the left. Light blue in the ADHD brain corresponds with light purple in the control brain. So you can see how underdeveloped the brain is in the ADHD brain when you compare it to same age peers without ADHD. Here is another picture of ADHD versus non-ADHD brain development at the age of 9. If you look at the ADHD brain, you can see that there's still significant parts of the brain that are not as developed as a child of the same age without ADHD. Here is another slide that shows the delay in development of ADHD versus non-ADHD brain development. You can see that there's a significant delay in the ADHD brain compared to the brain of normal, same-aged individuals. If you'd like to see the video in real time to watch the ADHD brain versus the non-ADHD brain development, go to this website on YouTube. It's a fascinating view of the progression of brain development and the lag in the ADHD brain. Here are the major characteristics of ADHD: impaired response inhibition, impulse control, inability to delay gratification. This is often noticed in individuals who have the inability to stop and think before acting, to wait one's turn while playing games, talking with others, having to wait in line, interrupting others quickly when it becomes evident that their actions are no longer effective, resisting distractions while concentrating or working, working for long-term rewards rather than opting for smaller, more immediate ones. You have seen these individuals in the line at school where the individuals with ADHD have difficulty waiting their turn. These are the kids who blurt out answers in the classroom without raising their hand. Sometimes they raise their hand and still blurt out answers or questions, not thinking before acting. Here are additional major characteristics of ADHD: excessive task irrelevant activity, or activity that is poorly regulated to the demands of a situation. These kids are always on the go. They're restless, they're fidgety, they have excessive movement. Think about being in church or wherever your religious institution is, and the kids that stand out because of difficulty sitting in their seats, staying quiet, not tapping. Younger kids with the disorder may show excessive running, climbing, and other gross motor activities. I'm sure we've all seen those kids at the mall who run rings around the clothes racks or have difficulty waiting in a restaurant to be seated. In adults with the disorder, this restlessness may be more subjective than outwardly observable, although some adults still remain outwardly restless and have difficulty containing themselves and the ability to sit still. Individuals with ADHD have poor sustained attention or persistence of effort to tasks. This is often evident when they're asked to do boring or tedious, repetitive activities. They often fail to show the same level of persistence or stick-to-itiveness, motivation, and willpower of others their age when uninteresting yet important tasks must be performed. For example, there are individuals without ADHD who can sit and study for hours, finish their homework, do what it is they need to do, and get up and move on. This is very difficult for an individual with ADHD. They become bored quickly, often have to get out of their seats, they lose concentration. The more boring the task is to them, the more difficulty they have attending to what it is they need to do. When concentration is very important, these individuals are highly distracted. Here are some of the difficulties with ADHD. Remembering to do things, or working memory. So working memory refers to the capacity to hold information in mind that will be used to guide one's actions, either now or at a later time. It's essential for remembering to do things in the future. So for example, think about doing a math problem and having to hold part of the equation in your mind while you work on the other part. This is very difficult for individuals with ADHD. They're described as forgetful, unable to keep important information in mind that they will need to guide their actions later, often disorganized in their thinking and other activities, and lose track of their goals. They may be described as acting without hindsight or foresight or forethought, and be less able to anticipate and prepare for future events. Individuals with ADHD, at least based on research, suggest that they have difficulty sensing or using time in their daily activities. As a result, they're often late for appointments, deadlines, getting activities or projects and assignments done in a timely manner. Here's another issue with individuals with ADHD. And part of this is also based on delay in brain development, but that development of internal speech. So, those of you who are psychology majors may have learned about Vygotsky and the internalized speech that develops as we age from infants on. So, most children who are infants don't have this capacity, and so that's why they babble and blurt out information. And but as time goes on, they do develop this private speech to help regulate their behavior. So, for example, a child without the ADHD has been told by the parents, when you go to church, when you go to the synagogue, when you go to the mosque, you need to sit still and not talk and not play with the books, not do anything that's distracting. The kids who have developed this internal speech will be able to remind themselves when they get into that situation not to play with the books, not to get out of their seat, not to tap. They follow the rules, they can remember the rules, but they don't talk about it. They keep it to themselves. This is that private speech that is delayed in individuals with ADHD. So, this inability to maintain the private speech can also affect their working memory. It can interfere with reading comprehension, especially complex, uninteresting, or extended reading assignments. Difficulties with regulations of emotions, motivation, and arousal. Children with and adults with ADHD often have problems inhibiting their emotional reactions to events, as well as others do of their age. It's not that the emotions they experience are inappropriate, but that the ADHD individuals are more likely to publicly manifest their emotions that others would keep to themselves. They seem less able to internalize their feelings and keep it to themselves. So consequently, it appears that they're emotionally immature, hot-headed, quick-tempered, easily frustrated. It also affects their ability to generate intrinsic motivation for tasks that have no immediate payoff or appeal to them. This is quite difficult for individuals with ADHD. Their motivation remains dependent on the immediate environment and how hard and how long they will work, whereas others develop a capacity for intrinsically motivating themselves in the absence of immediate rewards or other consequences. Individuals with ADHD will go for the quick reward. Those who do not have the disorder are able to persist longer, even when the situation is boring or frustrating for them. There's diminished problem-solving ability, ingenuity, and flexibility in pursuing long-term goals in ADHD. Often when we're engaged in goal-directed activities, problems are encountered that are obstacles to the goal's attainment. At these times, individuals must be capable of quickly generating a variety of options to themselves, considering their respective outcomes and selecting among them those which seem most likely to surmount the obstacle so they can continue toward their goal. Individuals with ADHD find such hurdles to their goals to be more difficult to surmount, often giving up on their goals in the face of obstacles and not taking the time to think through other options that could help them succeed toward their goal. So they appear less flexible in problem-solving situations. They respond automatically or impulsively, sometimes less creative at overcoming roadblocks to their goals. This can be evident in their speech, writing, and their ability to quickly assemble ideas into a more organized, coherent explanation of their thoughts. So in other words, they're less able to rapidly assemble their actions or ideas into a chain of responses that effectively accomplish the goals given to them, whether it's a verbal goal or behavioral goal. Greater than normal variability in their task or work performance. It is typical of those with ADHD, especially subtypes associated with impulsive behavior, to show substantial variability across time in the performance of their work. These wide swings may be found in quality, quantity, and even speed of their work, failing to maintain a relatively even pattern of productivity and accuracy in their work from moment to moment and day to day. You can see these behaviors in writing assignments, for example. So, for example, a major paper might be due, and there might be a requirement of 1,000 words or 2,500 words. This is quite difficult for individuals with ADHD to persist to present the amount of work that is asked. They may produce far fewer words and have a tendency to be more inaccurate and make a higher number of errors. Early onset of major characteristics. The symptoms of ADHD appear to arise on average between 3 and 6 years of age, particularly for subtypes of ADHD associated with hyperactive and impulsive behavior. We'll talk about those subtypes in a bit. Others may not develop symptoms until later, but most by the age of 13. Those with inattentive type may not develop symptoms until middle or late childhood. The major symptoms of ADHD are likely to change markedly based on the nature of the situation the person happens to be in. Research suggests that those with ADHD behave better in one-on-one situations when doing tasks that they enjoy or find interesting, when there is some immediate payoff for behaving well, when they are supervised in their work done earlier in the day rather than later, and for children when they are with their fathers compared to their mothers. So, for example, you may hear parents say, well, my child can sit and watch television for 5 hours straight without stopping. Or my child can sit and play video games without interruption, without stopping. But the moment they're asked to do homework, they have difficulty getting it done. So remember that tasks that individuals with ADHD find interesting provide more payoff to them than boring work such as homework or things that have to be done that are not as enjoying. There's a relatively chronic course of ADHD symptoms that are quite developmentally stable. Although the absolute level of symptoms does decline with age, this is true of the inattentiveness, impulsiveness, and activity levels of normal individuals as well. Those with ADHD may be improving in their behavior, but not always catching up with their peer group in this regard. This seems to leave them chronically behind others of their age in their capacity to inhibit behavior, sustain attention, control distractibility, and regulate their activity level. So remember the slides that we saw at the beginning of this presentation that showed the delay in brain development. So when you're evaluating an individual with ADHD, a child in particular, think about their performance with the age of that 2 or 3 year lag. And then you will recognize that their behavior is actually appropriate for that age. Research is showing that 50 to 80% will continue to meet the criteria for diagnosis in adolescent, and 10 to 65% may continue to do so in adulthood. 50 to 70% may continue to manifest some symptoms that are causing them some impairment in their adult life. Here are some of the adult outcomes for individuals with ADHD. Research suggests that 15 to 50% of those with ADHD outgrow the disorder, but probably only 20 to 35% no longer have impairing symptoms in their adult life. A significant minority of those with ADHD experience a greater risk for developing oppositional and defiant behaviors, conduct problems, antisocial difficulties, learning disabilities, low self-esteem, and depression. Approximately 5 to 10% of those with ADHD may develop more serious mental disorders, such as manic depression or bipolar disorder. Between 10 and 20% may develop antisocial personality disorder by adulthood, most of whom will also have problems with substance abuse. Overall, approximately 10 to 25% develop difficulties with overuse, dependence upon, or even abuse of illegal substances such as alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, illicit use of prescription drugs, with the risk of being greatest among those who had conduct disorders or delinquency as adults. More than 50% do not develop these symptoms. This is the end of part 1. Hopefully you will turn in to part 2.